Assalamu alaikum, hello and welcome to Africa This Week with me, Khalil Charles. This show looks at the affairs of sub-Saharan Africa and the African diaspora. On today's programme, we analyse what new set of peace talks could mean for Burundi. We also have our article segments as usual with our reporter Davide Salvi, and we look at how having to speak Afrikaans and socio-economic problems among less well-off students are causing difficulties in South Africa's universities. Lastly, with the threats of the El Nino weather pattern, we report on the job of maintaining the coral reefs near Mauritius. But first, more than 4 million people in Benin are expected to cast their votes in the country's forthcoming general election. But with 2 weeks still to go, many have not received their voter registration cards. Afzal Ahmed has more on this story and the rest of this week's headline news.
Benin's Election Commission on Friday opened its formal 15-day presidential campaign, imposed postponed to March the 6th due to voter card delays. In a statement, Benin's Independent National Election Commission said it is declared open for a period of 15 days from Friday, February the 19th at midnight. More than 4 million people are expected to cast their ballot in the small West African country, but 2 weeks before the election, many have still not received voter cards. Africa's tropical forests are threatened by a palm oil bonanza that has already raised millions of old-growth hectares in Southeast Asia, Greenpeace France warned Tuesday. The NGO called on European palm and rubber plantation giant Socfin, which controls vast tracts of tropical land in more than half a dozen African nations, to join other multinationals in adopting so-called zero deforestation policies.
Le groupe Bolloré, on le connaît davantage peut-être pour ses activités dans les médias, ses activités de transport, de logistique, mais peut-être ce qu'on sait moins, c'est que le groupe Bolloré est actionnaire à hauteur de 38% au sein d'une entreprise qui s'appelle la Socfin, qui est une entreprise de production de palmiers à huile et d'EVA en Afrique et en Asie, et qu'aujourd'hui cette entreprise elle possède des milliers d'hectares de plantations et qu'aujourd'hui elle n'a aucun engagement pour protéger les forêts qui sont situées à l'intérieur de ces concessions.
Africa's first homegrown platform for legal music downloads launched in Senegal on Wednesday with a mission to promote African artists, pay them properly and fight internet piracy. Internationally famous musicians such as Youssou N'Dour and Baba Mal are among almost 200 who have signed agreements with Music B, along with younger rappers, jazz artists and Christian and Muslim vocalists. At least 4 people, including 2 children, were killed in mortar attacks targeting the presidential palace in Mogadishu. By Thursday, provisional results showed Niger's President Mahamadou Issoufou ahead of rivals in his bid for a second term. Under election rules, a candidate must have 50% of the vote to win in the first round. Otherwise, the top 2 candidates must compete in a runoff poll. Niger's opposition parties say they do not recognize the first partial results of the recent presidential polls. A delegation of 5 African heads of state arrived in Bujumbura on Thursday at the start of a 2-day visit to push for talks to end Burundi's deep political crisis. The visit comes just days after a trip by UN Chief Ban Ki-moon to Burundi as part of growing international efforts to bring an end to 10 months of deadly turmoil. The African Union agreed to send the delegation during its January summit when Burundi successfully faced down a plan to deploy 5,000 peacekeepers to the country. It was headed by South African President Jacob Zuma and includes the leaders of Ethiopia, Gabon, Mauritania and Senegal. But the main umbrella opposition group, CNARED, whose leaders are in exile, dismissed it as a false opening, saying Nkurunziza did not want real negotiations to bring peace. The opposition was angered by the president's apparent attempt to choose who should participate when he said the dialogue would include all Burundians except those engaged in acts of destabilization. Previous talks have failed, with the Burundian government refusing to sit down with some of its opponents, who it accuses of involvement in a failed coup last May and months of violence.
Well, joining us to discuss what could be a new stage for peace in Burundi is Archi Henry, who's a political commentator on Burundi and Rwanda. As always, Archie, thanks very much for coming on the programme. Archie, can I begin by asking you about these latest diplomatic shuttle movements that have come into Burundi? We've had 5 presidents and also the UN. Is this issue being really treated seriously now?
I'm sorry, can you repeat the last question?
Is the issue really being treated seriously now, given the amount of heads of states that have come to Bujumbura?
Yes. Well, I had trouble hearing you, but I think you asked about how effective this push will be, this diplomatic push. It's still unclear, obviously, because there's been countless efforts from, the United Nations, the African Union, to push for inclusive talks, inclusive dialogue as the way to solve the crisis. But all of these attempts have so far failed. Part of that is because the Burundian government refuses to dialogue with all opposition groups. It only recognizes some groups as worthy of taking part in this dialogue. And then you have some opposition groups that are open to dialogue, but that refuse any sort of solution that maintains President Nkurunziza in power, whereas he's committed to stay in power as long as possible. Part of the disagreement was whether this dialogue would be held inside Burundi or outside, and some of these African heads of state who are in Bujumbura for the high-level delegation are trying to push for dialogue outside of Burundi so that all opposition groups could be included, but I honestly don't see how this will happen, because of all the delays that have been taking place and the obstruction from the government as well as the other side. So, I don't really see where this is going, but we have to wait and see the conclusion, obviously, of this delegation.
What kind of real leverage, Archie, can the leaders of states, the heads of states, have on the government? Because it did, of course, refuse to take the peacekeeping force in its country, and now it seems that there are not many options to try and resolve this problem if they won't have talks with different people in Burundi.
Yeah, well, I think they do have leverage. You saw for the first time in a very long time the president, Pierre Nkurunziza, making a public appearance to personally greet these heads of state at the airport. If that's not a sign that he's willing to talk with them and willing to listen to them. But now the question is, will enough pressure, enough carrots and stick, as you say in foreign policy, be put into the table to pressure the government and the president for these inclusive talks? The president of Burundi already promised inclusive dialogue when Ban Ki-moon was present, but some officials in the Burundian government have, the day after, said that this inclusive dialogue would not include the opposition platform in exile called CNARED. So I do think there's important leverage that African heads of state can use, especially Jacob Zuma, of course, as someone and as the president of a country that had a very important role to play in the negotiated settlements at the end of the Burundi Civil War, the early 2000s. So there's definitely some leverage they can use, and I do think the president is willing to listen to some extent, but whether that will translate into an end of the violence, I remain skeptical based on my analysis so far of this crisis.
I want to ask you about the events on the ground, but before I do that, what about the actual, if you like, is there a unanimity, is there a unified African Union that wants to deal with this issue? Because there have been divisions between the Rwandans, the Tanzanians, etc., that seem to have let the situation go on.
Oh yeah, good. That's a good point. I think there's still a lot of divisions, starting from the East African community. As you said, Rwanda would like to see sort of an end to the violence and perhaps a transition. I'm not sure, that's speculation, but Rwanda is clearly taking a stance in opposition of the Burundian government, whereas Tanzania has helped, one could say, Burundi, thwart the arrival of peacekeepers, of course not physically, but thwart diplomatically the arrival of African Union peacekeepers. You had the Peace and Security Council of the African Union propose to send peacekeepers to Burundi to stop the violence, but you've had heads of state, such as the head of Gambia, Tanzania, etc., who defended Burundi on the argument of sovereignty. So I do think there's still some divisions, but there are willing actors as well, starting from the chairperson of the African Union, Dlamini Zuma. But even if there's willingness to pressure Burundi on ending this crisis through dialogue, I think there needs to be much more concerted and effective pressure. So far, it has been very insufficient. AU, for example, promised to sanction some individuals in Burundi who are fomenting violence, but those sanctions have yet to be put in effect. So, yeah, I still think there needs to be more action rather than words.
I want to ask you about the situation.
Yeah.
Yes, indeed. I want to ask you the situation about what's on the ground at the moment and the accusation that the opposition is being helped by the Rwandans. Is there any truth in that accusation?
Well, you've heard these reports and these accusations come from different groups. There's an NGO called Refugees International. The United States said that some of these reports were credible, and UN had a group of experts wrote a few paragraphs on that point as well. I still think there needs to be more thorough. I mean, it's definitely possible, but I think there needs to be further evidence to corroborate that. But it's not out of question, of course. Archie, I think it's part of the regional situation, of course.
Indeed, Archie, we are hearing that there are kidnappings, abductions, and other kind of criminal activity going on. What kind of truth is that? Is there any truth behind that? Those kind of those things happening in Burundi at the moment?
Any truth to what?
The truth behind abductions and kidnappings and other such criminal activities.
Well, also, yeah, there's been also different reports as well on that coming from most recently the International Crisis Group, as well as Human Rights Watch, which are two important international organizations. Human Rights Watch focusing on situation on the ground, a lot of torture, according to them, extreme brutality from security forces against opponents. People perceived to be against the government, people perceived to be pro-opposition. So yeah, that was the latest report that came out yesterday. International Crisis Group, which focuses on resolving and preventing deadly conflict, has as well talked about that and really tried to put pressure on the African Union representatives, heads of state, to push for this inclusive dialogue, as this would be perhaps the best way out of the crisis. Indeed, because as armed opposition groups in Burundi, what we can call rebels or insurgents, step up their attacks, that also leads in more retaliation from security forces, from the government, against innocent civilians that are perceived close to the opposition. So there's a very negative downward spiral going on in Burundi, and this is why these are so relevant in terms of international.
Archie, we are running out of time, but I would like to ask you a final question, and that question is, with regard to what we can expect to come out of these talks and these meetings by the 5 presidents, what do you expect will be achieved in this new peace phase?
I think it's going to be like most other visits by international stakeholders to Burundi, which means the government of Burundi or the Burundian president himself will agree on some form of settlement and say, for example, I will agree to an inclusive dialogue, or I will agree to release prisoners, like he recently said to Ban Ki-moon. But this is definitely something like that is definitely going to come out of the visit by the heads of state. But I'm not sure if this is going to be nearly enough, nearly as effective as people would like it to be, due to this very deadly spiral of violence. It's almost now too late to stop it, as indeed some opposition groups and individuals have taken up arms to fight against the government, and they seem inclined on doing everything they can to remove him by force. So we're entering really a state of pre-civil war, or in fact, early civil war. And I think it's important to follow these developments from the African Union.
Well, we certainly will be doing that.
But I personally don't think it's going to be,
Yeah. Archie, thank you very much indeed for your comments, and we certainly will be keeping an eye and updating our viewers on developments there. Now, we look at online news, and joining us in the studio is our reporter, Davide. What's been going on, Davide? Where's the first place we're going to this week, Davide? The
first place we're going to this week is Burundi. In Burundi, we all know there is a terrible civil war going on, and this is an article from Quartz. It's an online magazine, and it's about this journalist. This journalist tries to go undercover and report in one of the most dangerous places on earth at the moment, which is Burundi. And how can he spread this article? Through Facebook, WhatsApp and social media platforms.
Of course, his identity is being kept secret, isn't it?
Yes, of course, his identity is kept secret. It's very dangerous now in Burundi, and those who want to report about what's going on in the country are risking their life. It's very dangerous, so they have to keep their identity secret. So he's keeping his identity secret, but he's delivering very good reports about the situation in the country.
I think it's very important because obviously earlier on we were talking about Burundi and talking about the situation where 5 heads of states have gone there to try and bring some kind of a resolution to the problems there. And many years ago, Burundi suffered from the same kind of civil war. Right. So the fear is it might actually explode and get into that situation again. And of course, this journalist is probably providing very good material with regard to the kind of information that's very, very important for people to know about what's going on there.
For people to know in one of the most dangerous places on earth. Very brave. One of us, a colleague.
Indeed. Where are we going next, Davide? What's
the next place we go is South Africa. We go to Nelson Mandela. There is a new movie coming out about Nelson Mandela. His personal secretary has written a memoir about her working life with Nelson Mandela. Her name is Zelda Lagrange, and she started as his typist in 1994 as soon as he became president, and then in 1999 she became his personal private secretary, and she wrote a memoir, and now this memoir is going to become a movie. This is not the first movie.
It's not. I was going to say, I mean, Mandela movies have been quite a few, hasn't there?
Yeah.
Hollywood busters, etc.
Yeah, we've seen plenty of movies on Mandela in the last few years. We remember Invictus of Clint Eastwood, and with also another one in 2013 with Idris Ezra. It's a celebration of one of the most important figures of.
Presumably, it's going to be from the point of view of his secretary.
Yes. She's going to be the main focus on the movie, and of course that will then open up the way to describe what happened during this time, during his presidency, during the end of apartheid, a whole new season for South Africa.
That just shows you how important Mandela still is, even years after his, a year or so after his death. He still carries that weight and importance for the people of that region. Absolutely amazing, isn't it? Really. Yeah. What's the next story you got for us?
The next story that I got for you. Now we move on to Nigeria. President Buhari went to Saudi Arabia, and he met with the King of Saudi Arabia. Of course, the focus of their discussions was about economics issues and how to bring together the two countries to get over the economic problems and the budget problems that Nigeria has. But
it hasn't been all rosy with Saudi Arabia.
It's not been all rosy with Saudi Arabia, because another topic was the big focus of these talks between Buhari and the King of Saudi Arabia. Arabia, and it is military. You know that Saudi Arabia has formed a coalition, an alliance of 34 Middle Eastern and African nations. Among them, there are Benin, Mali, Chad, Niger, Gabon, Senegal, Somalia, Togo, and Guinea. They all joined this coalition to, face extremism, to fight extremism. And Nigeria didn't join this coalition.
Did they give any specific reason, do you think?
Yeah, there is. The reason that they gave is that the stance of Saudi Arabia on extremism has been ambivalent. They think that Saudi Arabia has not done enough to fight against the Islamic State group and to fight extremism, although Saudi Arabia is doing definitely more in this day and ages, in particular in the last few months.
Indeed. There is one more article that you've got for us. What is that?
Yeah, I have one last article. This is a very quirky article about the end of Black History Month. It's from MIC. It's an online magazine as well,
right.
And they have pointed out the best moments of Black History Month, starting from Beyonce's Super Bowl performance. She made this big performance.
There was kind of a mixed reaction to Beyonce's
performance.
Wasn't there?
Yes, there was a very mixed reaction. Some said that this performance was a bit exaggerated, a bit over the top. She went a bit over the top, dancing with those panthers and everything. Other people said that she made a point, and she stressed her identity, and it's Black History Month after all, so it's fine to be a bit over the top, especially in an occasion like the Super Bowl, which is a big thing in the United States.
So what other things did the article talk about?
The article talks about a musical of Hamilton, the founding father of the United States, who won a Grammy Award, and there is a very multicultural cast, and they think this is one of the things that really marked the Black History Month, and also the DeRay Mckesson, who is a civil rights activist in the United States, who is running for mayor of Baltimore. And he'll probably have a lot of grassroots support from the black community living in Baltimore, and it's a positive news for the black community and probably for us all that civil rights activists get involved in politics. And last but not least, it's Barack Obama. This is his
what's he been up to?
Yeah, this is his last year as president, and it's his last Black History Month. He did a couple of funny things. One was dancing with this lady. She's a 106 years old lady.
Wow.
Yeah, and she danced with her. She's a black lady, and he danced with her and his wife Michelle Obama. And during a press conference, this is the second thing that he did. During a press conference, there was a journalist or someone in that press conference who made an appreciation to the first lady, and he responded, "Hey," in a way that the journalist of Mick depicted as very black, stressing his black identity in his response to this sort of provocation, if you want.
Davide, it's been fascinating. Thanks very much indeed for coming onto the program.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks.
After the break, we're looking at South Africa and the university crisis. So we'll see you shortly after that.